Hi everyone. On today's video, we are going to go over some things we kind of glossed over previously, which were data validation and a little bit more of the authentication. So we're going to start out with data validation. We're going to kind of go over how our registration currently works, which is we have this register.razor page, and we are going to, instead of it getting all the way to our server backend, we're going to do some front-end validation here. So when you're about to do on valid submit, we're using this on valid, which will be looking at our data validation before it's going to submit here. So what we're going to do is we're going to first, let's mark up the register model here. And if we hit F12, it'll take us to it, and we're going to go look at email. We're going to set required. Automatically, I think, import that. Okay, required, and I believe we can set an email address. Email address, yes, we can. Awesome. And then now I think we can set we can actually do a requirement here. We're going to just go required, and we're going to say min length 8. So you're gonna have minimum length of 8 here. I think you can throw some regex in there, but let's just do this really quick to where, and we're gonna throw in a pair to name of, we're gonna call this a register model. We're gonna reference our register model dot password. So we're gonna say, hey, you gotta compare it, and it should set that to say that we are going to have this one match this one here. Okay. All right, so now we got to throw some actual validation messages in the form. So on this page, so we go back to this page, we're going to be able to set some validation here. And what we're going to do is we have a tag immediately underneath here that is going to be called data annotations validator. Sweet. Okay. So that will just say, all right, we're going to do annotations validation support to an edit context. And what we have to do now is we also have to throw in, for each one, we're going to throw in, this is where the message will appear. So this tag, we're gonna basically bind it to each one here. So we're gonna have validation message for, we're gonna have this for register user dot email, and then we're gonna take this and we're gonna throw this here and throw this here. We're gonna change this dot password, so this one's gonna be for the password, and this one's gonna be for confirm password. Okay, so let's check that out. Let's see how this one will run. So hopefully we'll get some kind of error messaging before we actually have to go through to the back end. And that is handled because of the on valid submit. So hopefully it should be doing some data validation before it gets to the back end. Let's do a register login. Let's try and register a new user, and let's just call it, oh, and let's do one more thing. Let's make these actually look like passwords real quick. Okay, so on the input text for the password, we're going to do type, not type of, password. And sadly, don't always rely on IntelliSense to know everything, sadly. But yeah, type equal to password, so that should hide that and make it look a little more like what we expect to see. Okay, let's run that again. Let's look at that, and hopefully we get some data validation. We'll do some errors. So here, we'll try and just do this Gmail account, and then we'll do awesome. Look at that. Look at that. I just hit tab to go to the next line. So if we do confirm password and password do not match. Nice. Awesome. So now let's try and mess up the email real quick. Email field is required. Field is required. Email field is not valid email address. Awesome. So you can see that response is really, really quick, right? So let's do another email address. Let's do that guy. And we're going to do a password that is... Let's have an uppercase. Okay. So that's when it hits the back end validation. And let's do... And I'm writing this down for mine, so we'll see. And this is where I believe, let's go look at our console real quick. I think we just had some things inserted. And if we go look at our... So this is something, this is kind of a response that we want to have. We have no kind of response, right? We have nothing that will indicate, hey, your user actually got inserted into it. So what we're going to do is let's go look at our current SQL real quick to make sure that we can see some of this stuff that's being entered. So we're going to go into here, our databases, FLP, tables, and let's go look at our users. We're going to view data. Okay, we have this and that guy. It's perfect. Okay. So it did insert. We need to have some kind of action, right, on a successful confirmation here. So after the handle valid register, right, if the status code is not 200, we're going to print out the status code. Else, we can have it go to the... Let's have it go to a login page. And in this case, it will actually be on the same... well, let's look at this. Because currently, if you remember our components right now, we have register /login. And right now, I think we might have to do some things. Let's do a separate page for register login. So remember, every new page, you want to have an easy way to navigate to each page. And this is very bare bones. There's not a lot of CSS going on. So we're going to have one login page for this for now, just as for demonstration purposes, right? So we're going to, let's have a login page, right? Let's make a new Razor component. And we're going to call this login.razor. So this is where we're going to get into our login functionality and start looking at what is going on behind the scenes with with authentication for login. Okay, so we're going to do something very similar to register, but in this case, we're going to have a edit form for a login user. So we're going to try and do that. So let's build this out. You know what? I'm just going to copy pretty much everything except the top bit because I know we're going to need it. And let's take a look at getting login. Say login user. Going to have an error message at the top. And let's, before we do anything, let's go do a new model so we make sure we are changing everything. So let's go put it in the same place. We're going to do this. We're going to do class login model. And all we're going to do is we're going to just put required, and we could do some front-end validation here, but for now I think we'll just leave it as, hey, if you want to log in, you're going to have to do some, you're going to have to just have this and an email, and a password. So you're going to have a login model here. So if we go back to the login page, let's change this to login user, and we're going to change this to login model. Perfect. Take that, and then we're going to have to do some changing with our data validation here. So we're going to go login user. So we're going to say, okay, we want to, if they have a required user or email and password enter, we're going to have a handle valid login. And in this case, we're going to call handle valid login. It's going to be a login and pass in the login user. And we're going to have to go in and add more functionality into that service. So for now, let's fix this up real quick. Let's do login user.email. And then let's get rid of this div here and change this button to login. And user, login user. Cool. Okay. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to add some functionality for login. So we're going to try and handle a valid login here. So let's go to the client user account, and we're going to say, okay, class client, sorry. I'm looking at the wrong thing. Okay. Public async, task. We're going to return that status of whatever's happening. Okay, and we're going to call this login. We're going to have a login model. We're also going to call that model. We're going to say our response will await client.post as JSON async. So we're saying, hey, we're going to go to this API endpoint. We're posting data there, which is going to be the login model. And we're going to hit this API endpoint user account, which is our controller name. And this is going to be the action. Throw the model in there. We're going to await response content read from JSON async, and it's going to be that status model. And if you remember, that status model is actually out here and shared because we are using that on both the server. We are using the register model and login model, but that's more specific to user account services. So we're going to shove that there, but status can be used all over the place. So we're going to throw that in here. Okay, so we have that determined here. Let's take this and throw this in the interface. Thank you. Okay. And now we're going to go to the server user account, and we are going to do this one first before we go into the controller and set that up, just because I have this copied out. And we're going to do public async task login. Okay, and now we're going to say, we're going to leverage the sign-in manager, I believe. So in this case, we're going to be saying, hey, sign-in manager, we're going to pass you a username and the email and the password, and hopefully, if all is well, it will log in and do some authentication there. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some var user. So let's find the user real quick. So let's say we're going to look at user manager real quick. We're going to say user manager, which this is able to access the database. We're going to find .email. We're going to look for that email. We're going to say model.email. And we're going to see if that user is null. We are going to return a new status that says, okay, you failed to find us a user. So you either input it incorrectly or you're not authorized with that password. So we're going to do 401, which is not authorized. So invalid username or password. And we're going to be a little... We're not going to tell them that they've done something specifically incorrect here. We're just going to say, hey, invalid username or password. I'm going to return that. However, if not, we're going to put a try catch around this because there could be a failure. And we're going to try and do a var result off of sign in manager. It is also going to try and do a password sign in asynchronous and we're going to pass in the user.email. And we're also going to do we're going to take the user email because it found the user. This user, by the way, is application user. So we're passing the model. It's returning out the application user. So user.email. And then we're going to pass in the model.password. And we're going to do is persistent, false. Blackout on failure, false. We're doing some testing. Depends on, your situation, but that is functionality built into the sign-in manager. So we're going to now continue on to say, okay, so if your result failed, so if it did not succeed, we're going to return a new status, and we're going to actually do this same status. We're going to say you have either a invalid username or password. We're not going to tell them either way because that in itself is a little bit of security issue for saying, hey, yeah, we found that user, but you failed. So we're hoping that the user trying to log in knows their email. So now, okay. Now we need to generate them a token. This is where the functionality exists for like authentication with the JWT token. And what we're going to do is we're going to say var token equals generate JWT token based off of our application user, our user. So what we're going to do is we're going to, is there a quick extract method? Look at that. Awesome. So we're going to get token. I guess it wanted it to name that, but I think we're going to do generate. It was handy for that, but we're going to do generate. So we're creating it, we're not just getting it. Okay. So expect an application user. We are going to go look at the claims real quick in our program.cs. Okay. So in the program.cs, we are looking at basically, so we're adding a JSON web token bearer, and we're providing all these token validation parameters here. And that includes, we're including a signing key here. We have the issuer audience, valid issuer, audience, issuer signing key, and we're validating lifetime, all these settings here. So what we need to do is we need to initialize, we need to create this key. So that's what we're going to be doing. So we're going to remove this, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a list of claims. We're going to say claims equals new array of claims here. where we're going to say you have a new claim, and in this case, system.security.claims. Okay, we're good. JWT registered claim names dot sub is going to be the user ID. We're going to have a new claim, JWT registered claim names dot email, user dot email. We're going to have a new claim here for JWT registered claim names dot referred. Well, let's just do name. And we're going to have user dot username. So we're going to say, okay, this token is going to have these claims to an ID, an email, and a username. And we're going to basically be able to pass these around and use these to authenticate the user. And to do that is we don't want to pass that around plain text. We want to have a key. We're going to create this symmetric security key. And we're going to pass our coding.utf8 get bytes. And we're going to try and pass in the... So up here, I did add this as well. So if you check this out, actually, add I configuration, because we need the configuration here. We need configuration, and this is what's going to let us access our app settings here. So we're going to get bytes, and we're going to access the configuration. We're going to look at here. And that should be accessing JWT key. And that's going to be our super awesome key. You don't like this, though. You cannot use primer constructor parameter in this context. Private static. Okay. All right, we don't want that. I should have used that. I shouldn't have used the auto generator there, because now it can't. It's not static. It's not going to be able to see that. Okay. So now we can see that here. All right. Now we're going to have more creds. We're going to have credentials, and that's going to be signing credentials. And we're going to pass in the key we just created, and we're going to secure that with a SHA-256. And then we're going to be able to create the token. So we're going to do a new JWT security token. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign some things here. So if you look, we're going to do the configuration, and we're going to say, hey, your issuer, we're going to pull that, and we're going to set the issuer here. So if you look here, we need a issuer. We need a audience, which is going to be the configuration, and we're going to reference the audience. And then we're going to set claims. And we're going to say, okay, this is going to expires in 30 minutes. Let's say we're gonna do now plus 30 minutes. So 30 minutes from now, we're going to have our signing credentials as the creds. And let's wrap that up here too. So that is one long line of code there. Okay. So now we're going to say, okay, we have now set up a token. Now we need to have the handler handle this token and say, okay, I'm keeping track of this, and I'm watching on the server's end to make sure that I can see this token and I can expire it when, or not authenticate against it if it's past the time. So we're going to do turn new T security token handler, and we're going to write this token. in compact serialization format. So we're going to write the token and basically pass it back. So we're going to return this token. So this token is then going to be set in the login. So we're going to log the user in by saying, okay, we've accepted everything and we're going to write you a token back out. And now what we're going to do is in the login, we need to say, okay, so if you got to this point, you are successfully signed in. So we're going to say, awesome. You are or should be authenticated now. And again, you got to remember, client-side code is not safe. We're going to actually pass the token back as the message, which can be the, so yeah, that's the way we're gonna handle that. Is we're going to send the token back in the response, and that token is basically how the user is going to validate any request. And again, it's signed, so the only way it's going to be decoded is by the server. So this is what's security oriented about this, is that, hey, for authentication, we're going to give you something that the server can decrypt. Only the server can decrypt. So when you're calling, let's say, functions in the future on the site that only signed in authenticated users should have, it's going to decrypt that token and say, okay, yes, you are who you say you are, or this token is a valid token with an issuer audience and it's not expired. So we're going to pass that in. And again, this is in the try catch. So let's say any part of this process fails, we're just going to throw this out. We're going to say capture that exception, and let's throw out let's return a status code of 400, which is just a bad request. And let's just say that let's say there's a login. I don't want to show that we're writing a specific token or where it'll fail in the token creation process. Okay. So now that we have created a token, a JSON web token, to basically handle authentication, verify what user is there. Let's talk more about what's going to happen in the login. So in the login, we have to set up some kind of authentication state to say, hey, this user has now signed in. But if you remember, some things aren't necessarily secure on the client end. You have to assume that they're going to be able to edit the page, move things around, open up the functionality of the page, basically. So all your sensitive information should be hidden behind some kind of, not just an authentication state provider, because that can be, again, hacked and made to work just to expose everything. So any kind of sensitive data you want hidden behind token validation, so that if you're getting things, you want to check to see, hey, you have a valid token, but that signed in user, it is matching, things are matching up, and everything looks good. But we'll go over more of that in a future episode. Today we're going to kind of finish up this login and authentication state. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, you're going to log in by going here, and we need to kind of trace this back. So we're going to do user account service dot login, past this login user that we created. If we go look at the client user account service, we have that login model here. It's then going to hit this API endpoint, and we haven't set that up yet in the controller. So if we go to the controller, we have a user account controller here. We're going to have it's going to be an HTTP post, and it's going to be taking action, and that action is defined by the function name. We're going to call this iActionResult, login, and we're going to pretty much copy this. There's going to be a lot of copy and pasting, which is nice just to get things done faster. especially when you know what you're looking to do. So var result equals await user account service dot login. We're going to log in that model. And we're going to say, okay, so this is what's actually going to be connecting the client side code to the server side code. And now we're going to set here, we're going to say results.code equals, we're going to say, okay, if it was 200, it was successful. So we're going to return okay. And we're going to return that result. Else, we're going to return we can say bad request. We could say else if, well, let's say, okay, if 200, let's just say if result.code equal 401. This could be an if else block, but hey, it's pretty much going to do the same thing. And this is the way my brain wants to do it right now. So we're going to do 401 is unauthorized request, and we're going to return that same result. And we're going to say, if it's gotten through all those, we're going to return bad request. So if all else fails, we're returning a bad request here. Okay. All right, so that should finish hooking everything up here. So what we need to do is we're logging in the user, right? So what we're doing is we're saying, all right, we're going to handle the valid login. If the result is not equal to 200, we're going to say, okay, there was an error message here. And if not, so if it was successful, we want to do some custom authentication to mark user is authenticated. So what we want to do is we want to update the error message, and let's do state has changed. And state has changed is a Blazor specific to say, hey, something's updated. So what we're going to do is we're going to re-render the page. So this is like a re-render. So be very careful with throwing this around, because if you're in a render loop, that is going to not be good. Your site is going to constantly refresh over and over and over and over again. So you want to stay away from using this inside a specific loop. So we're handling this as a button click, as handled valid login currently. So it should be okay for now. So we're going to look at now. So we're going to look at some custom authentication state. So we're gonna implement that real quick. So if you go look at our program.cs real quick. Okay. So actually, after looking at the program.cs, we're going to be looking into the client program.cs, because this is where that custom authentication state provider is actually going to live. So we need to add a few things here to tell the services. We're gonna tell the server or the client that you're going to be using services.add cascading authentication state. So what that means is we're going to be saying, all right, you're going to be looking at this so that you can do some, we're going to need to include a package here. We're going to need this, and we're going to need builder.services.add authentication state serialization. Maybe I spelled that or did not. Okay, so we're going to include a package here. So manage NuGet packages. I believe it's Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Components dot components dot authorization. And we're in .NET 8 right now, so we're gonna go there. Apply, accept. Okay. Right now it's in there. So hopefully in the program.cs of the, let's clean this up real quick. Program.cs here. Sweet. I don't know if I spelled that right. Add authentication, yes. State deserialization. Maybe this is maybe a .NET 9. This might be a .NET 9 thing from the documentation I'm looking at. Okay, all right. So let's just roll with that. But we're gonna say, okay, you're gonna be using authorization and cascading authentication state here. So what we're gonna do is now we're going to introduce a authentication state provider for our application. And so what that will do is it will be sitting here in the client, and what we can do is we can add tags to our site here. So let's say in our, let me give you an example of that real quick. So let's say in the components, right? Let's say at the home page. So we say, welcome to your new app. Let's say, let's have an authorized view, right? And let's cut that down because that doesn't look too good. Let's say authorized view. So let's say if you're authorized, you're going to be seeing this view. Remember that the client is not really going to be secure. So you don't want to use this for like sensitive data or anything like that. You want to say, hey, you're going to see a message, or you're going to see a string that says welcome, you know, or whatever. So we're going to do that. We're going to say, if you're authorized, we're going to say you have been authenticated. And authorized, I guess, because you haven't been authenticated until you've actually talked to the back end here. You've been authorized. You've been authorized by our custom state provider, but we're going to do not authorized. We're going to say, please log in. And we could say, please log in here. And we can say, we can do an ahref equals slash login. Oh, I don't know if I want to tag it like that. Because we want to say here, that's right. Please log in here. Okay. So we're going to say, all right, so to use this authorization state, we need to have a few things going on, though, that are going to help us here, which are, we need to have that custom authentication state. So let me get that set up. So we're going to create a new, we're going to have a new item, and we're going to call this our custom authentication state provider. So custom authentication state provider. And that's just going to be sitting here, because within this authentication state provider, we're going to have a few things going on. So this is going to inherit from authentication state provider. So what we're going to do is we're going to override a few things here. So we're going to say this is a public class here, and we need to inherit some of the things that it wants us to do. So we need to implement the abstract class. So we need to do an override of this here. So before we do that, let's do a few things that we're going to need. So we're going to need a private read-only IJS runtime. So in here, we're going to be reading from an IJS runtime. So we're going to need to look at our token here. So we're going to have a cache token as well. So this is on the client. So we're going to say, all right, so we're going to get authentication state async. We're going to try and get our token here. We're going to say var token equals await, and we're going to have a function called get token async. It's an asynchronous function. Just because we're using JS runtime here. So we're going to want to wait this one. So we're going to have a private async. So we're going to return a string, which is going to be the get token. So we're getting the string out of this. So we're going to say if our cached token is null, we're going to say our cache token is going to equal. So we're going to store it. We're going to try and store our token in this custom authentication state provider. If not, we're gonna try and grab it again. We're gonna use JS runtime to get it. And there are some issues you can run into with JS runtime when you're doing server pre-rendering or pre-rendering of the page. So we're gonna hopefully get around that by doing this here. We're gonna say invoke asynchronous here. We're gonna say, all right, we're gonna try and get this. If we can get into IJS runtime, we can hopefully get our local storage. This is where we're going to put we're calling this function get item from local storage, and we're going to call this auth token. So we're going to be storing the token in local storage. So there are some security risks with storing it there, but for now we're just going to continue on with storing the token there for the time being. So now after this, we're going to return a cache token. And now back up here, we're going to say, okay, we're going to try and get it. We're going to say, okay, so the identity is going to be string.is null or empty. So we're going to check to make sure that if the token is empty, and we're going to say if it is, it's just going to be claims identity blank. Else, we're going to say it's going to be claims identity. We're going to pass in all those security claims that we set. And we're going to call this, we're going to call a function here. We're going to create a function where we pass in the token, and that's going to just take out all our claims there. And we're going to front it with a JWT. Okay, so we're going to create this function here. And this function is going to be, we're going to return private I enumerable. We're going to have claims returned, and we're going to do the parse claim from JWT, and we're passing in, again, that string. Because we're getting the token as a string. What we're going to do, parse claims from JWT, we're going to say, okay, so our payload, we're going to split that string on the periods, and we're going to get the first instance of that. And we are going to say string split options based on this. Yeah, sorry about that. It's not the first one. We're going to basically get a string returned from that. Actually, I believe it is. Sorry. So yeah, so there's two things going on here, which is we're splitting on periods, and then we're going to get the 0, 1, so the second thing from that. And the second thing from that is it is going to be our bytes equals web coders dot base 64. And I'm getting this code from a forum or some documentation that I have that I will also provide. And what this is just a dereferencer of that token. So we're going to take that JSON serializer dot deserialize. So we're going to be taking that and we're going to be breaking that into object of these bytes that we have. And we're going to return the key value pairs here. Select key equals new claim key dot key kbp dot value dot toString. Okay. So we need to take web encoders and hopefully get this from web utilities. Install with package manager again because we're on .NET 8. Install. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So we're parsing in from the token here. We're getting the claims back out. Okay. So now, if that token exists, then we're going to grab all that stuff out from it. We're going to say the user is going to be a new claims principal. If you've seen like user context, that's what this is a claims principal. And that is just, hey, who's currently using this application right now? This is usually how you'll reference it. So we're going to return a new authentication state of that user, that claims principal here. So we're returning that. So basically we're saying, okay, we're returning an authentication state, and that authentication state we're passing in a claims principal. So we're going to throw a catch on here. We're going to say, okay, if something goes wrong during this, we're going to have a new authentication state, but that means that the claims principal is nothing. Claims identity should default. There's no claims attached to it at all. So if you try and authenticate and you don't have anything, you're going to not get any kind of authentication done, but you're still going to be authenticating a blank user there. So I don't think this will basically just say, all right, this user is still anonymous. There's nothing claimed. There's nothing to say that this person is actually logged in. And what we're hopefully going to do is we will be able to unauthenticate people or de-authenticate, verify authentication and change that. But again, I'm going to drill this in your head, is the client is not secure. If somebody is trying to do something bad, they're going to know that the client is insecure and look for any kind of weaknesses in the client to exploit some backend, or look for sensitive data on the client end. So you don't want that anywhere near there. So now we're going to say, okay, we are able to get an authentication state for the current user, but we also want to be able to use that authorization state, right? We want, or the authorized tags here. So let's say when we have a successful login, right? Let's say we want to mark user as authenticated. What we're going to do is we're going to say var token. We're going to get the token, get token async. We're going to say the identity is the new claims identity. Parse claim. So we're going to grab these, and we are going to put that on there. And so this is going to be the identity of our user equals new principal. Pass that identity through. Var auth state equals task.from result. We're going to say new authentication state. We're going to pass that user in, and we're going to notify authentication state has changed to say that, hey, we're passing the auth state. We're to say, hey, it's almost like a state has changed. This is saying, hey, your authentication state has changed. We need to render things to say that we're passing in whenever that custom authentication state is used to say that authentication. So they're either an anonymous user. In this case, we got the token. We're saying, okay, we're going to pass that in. And in this case, it could be that the user is just an anonymous user. So nothing could happen or something could happen. So now when we want to mark somebody as logged out, so we're going to say actually public void mark user as logged out. So they just logged out. We're going to say anonymous. It's new claims principal. So we're going to just say, hey, they're going to be that same claims identity here. So they're actually not anyone in the auth state is going to pass that in. So we'll pass the task back of this authentication state, passing in the anonymous claims principal. And we're going to notify authentication state has changed with that auth state set as an anonymous user. Okay, so marked user is logged out. So the user is now anonymous. Okay, all right, that was a lot. So let's now talk about some things. So we're getting the cache token, right, from this local storage, right? We currently aren't storing that quite yet, and that is because we need to, in the client side, we're sending it back in the controller, if you remember. We're sending back the, on login, on OK, we're sending the result back, and in the server user account service, if you remember, we're sending that token back in the message. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the service user account, client user account service. On the login here, we have to get that back out of the returned message here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, all right, so with our response, we want to probably not return that response in plain text, just because we want some things to stay a little bit separate from the user here. So if response dot, let's say is success status code. All right, so return 200. If you remember, an OK is sent back. We're going to say our token equals response await response dot content. So we're going to look in the content. We're going to read from JSON async, and we're going to pass the token response. Actually, read from JSON. We're going to get the string, not a token response. We're going to get the string here, and what that string is going to be that message that we pass through. So we're going to do await. So there are thinking ahead here. Okay, so we're going to say await. We're going to save token. We're going to take token as hopefully this string that we're getting from the message here. We are going to save the token, not the toke, but the token. We're going to save that, and we're going to do this as a private async task. We're going to call this save token. And we're going to say we're passing in the token to it to save it. So we're going to await JS runtime. We don't have that set, so we're going to actually include that up here. So whenever we need something, we're going to basically say, yep, I've expected it. We're going to do some dependency injection here. So we need JS runtime here. And we are going to grab invoke void async because we're not expecting any kind of return. We're going to say local storage dot set item. This is a function, and we're going to say auth token. If you remember, that's what we called it. We're getting that auth token. Now we're setting that auth token here, and we're going to pass in the token. Okay. So in the login, we're going to read it from the JSON. We're going to save it, and we're going to say, hey, return a new status. We're still going to return that status, and we're going to say, in this sense, we're going to say, hey, code is 200. We're going to say message equals, we have a successful login. We're just going to say, hey, we have a successful login. That's all they need to know. They don't need to see the token because we're catching it here. And if not, if the login fails, we're going to just say, hey, you have a new status of, let's say that there's a code. We're just going to say code 400, and you have that request. That request. Okay, so here I'm kind of concerned though. Okay, so in the content, read from JSON async, we have var token response. Token or response status, right? So we're actually getting, remember, we're passing it back as a status. So we're getting a status back. So that status is actually what is going to contain status dot message. So we know that if it's a success status code, so if it's a 200, we're going to say, okay, if it's a status code of 200, then we know that it should contain that token in the status dot message. So we're going to save it there. Okay. I believe now we can go look at the custom authentication state provider again. So we're getting the token in here. Now we need to look at the program.cs. We need to say, okay, we need to use that authentication state provider. We need to be able to say, hey, you have a service, builder.services.add scope, and we have an authentication state provider. We have an authentication state provider, but you're going to be looking at custom authentication state provider here. So that's your authentication state provider. So now in our login, we want to handle that login, right? We want to say if it's a failure, we're going to just say, hey, failed that login, we're going to pass that message back. But if the status is a 200, we are going to explicitly, we're going to say, hey, we're going to actually log you in here. So we handle that valid login. We're going to we're going to actually need to do a few things. We're going to need to reference our authentication state. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at injecting our authentication state provider called and we'll just call authentication state. This is going to accept the using here. Okay, so we have our authentication state. Now we need to do a cast real quick, because we need to use those functions we created specifically for our private or our custom authentication state provider. So we're going to do private custom authentication state provider, and we're going to call this custom auth state. We're going to take this custom auth state and we're going to say, okay, we need a few things to happen. There are some issues with how we're doing our pre-rendering. We want to keep pre-rendering functionality, but that will also break JS runtime, because when you have, let me find this here. When you have interactive auto, it's going to go between pre-rendering and passing it back off to the client. So we want to do the login. When we log them in, we want to make sure that the custom authentication state, when they're here, we need to log them in correctly. So we're going to look at that in a second. We're going to handle valid login. We're going to say, okay, so you got here at success, we're going to say await custom authentication state dot mark user as authenticated. And then we're going to then navigate them back in, right? Let's say if I think we need navigation manager as well. Okay, so we do need navigation manager. Navigation manager. Navigation manager. We're gonna call this navigation manager just like that. Okay. So we're gonna say if you log in correctly, we're gonna navigate you back to the home page. Navigate to /. And then hopefully you'll be able to see that you've been marked as authenticated and can see that new message and hey, log in here. Okay. So let's build this here and let's see. We have a lot of code that we haven't tested, so we need to make sure that we got some we have it flowing correctly here. Okay, build succeeded. All right, let's run this here and let's see if we get anything happening yet. Consider using cascading authentication state to supply this. Authorization requires a cascading parameter. Okay, so if you go and look here in the program.cs, I believe this is in the, did we look at app.cs? I don't think it's in the app.cs. I think it's in the routes. I believe it's in the routes actually. So when you're routing, we want some, where's my routes? There it is, routes.cs. Okay, routes.razor, not routes.cs. Okay, so if you look here, we're gonna go found, we're gonna go authorize route view. Let's get rid of this and let's say we're gonna be using authorization here. We want to authorize this route view to say route data, default layout. I think we're going to actually replace this here. So we're going to take this and we're going to actually, I believe, remove, yep, we're going to remove route view there. Okay, and then we're going to close this tag up, authorize route view, and we're going to do not authorized. We're going to redirect to login. I don't know if we have to leave X to login. I don't think we have that component, but we shall see. I don't think we do. Okay, so we're going to actually just set this here. We're not going to do any not authorized. We're going to say, all right, you're able to look at any page. We'll fix this in a second, but let's leave this here to where we have it functioning for the time being, because we need to go and look at some code. All right, so looking through here, hopefully we can get to a good screen. Awesome, we got in, and as you can see, we have the thing that says, okay, if you're not logged in, you need to go here. All right, let's try and remember my password. So we're gonna say that guy. Oh, did I write this down right? I just want this open. Okay. I don't think I did. If you can see, I believe, on the networking here. So we're going to do this guy. Bad requests. Okay. So fail it on that. Okay. So I didn't write the password down. Give me 1 second. Okay. I'm just going to create a new user. Don't die. Because I can't remember. It's hopefully a good enough password. Register. We also need to have a navigation link to probably the login there. We're going to have what guy? Oh my goodness. I know why it's not working. So, we're going to go here. The login. We're going to wait for it to log in, right? And we're going to say, all right, so what was the result? Why did it fail? Succeeded, false. Is locked out, false. Is not allowed, false. Requires two-factor, false. Succeeded, false. Okay. Why would this user have failed to log in? Why would it have failed here? I believe it's because if you go and look in here, there's something under the register that we need to look at. So if you go and look at the SQL Server, right? You go look at the users. We actually want to edit some data here. I don't want your design. Out of there. We're going to view data. What we're going to do is email confirmed to true. So this is something where, let's say like when you're signing up for a certain website, you'll have an email that says click here to register, and when you click that email, it'll say, okay, great, you've confirmed your email, you can now log in. We're going to skip that and just say the email has been confirmed here. So now, let's try and run that and see if we get farther. Also, I put some breakpoints in. So on, and I'll show you where real quick. So remember, we have a couple points that we want to look at. One is the login page itself. We want to put one here where we have a successful login. We also want to say, well, we're going to go into the user account. So we're going to put one here in the user account, and remember the controller and the server side. We kind of want to look at all those kind of points where code is being hit. We're going to click this. We're going to say, what guy? All right, we're going to try and log in. Okay, so we're in the client, we're in the controller, we're in the server. User is equal to null. Okay, so we found the user. We're attempting a login, and it failed. Why are you failing here? Uh-oh. User.email. Oh, okay, okay. We're good, we're good. What guy? Yeah, the password. Oh, there you go. You guys see my password that I set. Okay. Hmm. Seated false. What is it that you are looking for on this sign in manager? First two-factor. Succeeded is false. Requires two-factor is set to true. Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Let's go look here again. Do we have this set? So we're gonna just say, okay, we've confirmed your email. Two-factor enabled. No, it's set to false. Lockout enabled. Yes. Access failed. Count. Okay. So I went a little far ahead and was just testing to make sure everything went smoothly. And it didn't. And it was because of a large error here. So if you remember, in our register user, right, we edited the username. That is how the sign-in manager is getting the name to log in. So if we go look at, I believe here, we go to the, oh man, I'm all over the place. So we have the login. Okay, we have the server side. Okay, we want the server side, sorry. So we do password sign-in. It wants the username. So user.email is not what we want. We actually want to pass in the user dot username. Okay, so we want to pass in the username, right? And in here, I was doing some testing on this account that I created because there were some errors. Okay, and change the username back to what it was. Okay, we're gonna keep that. We're gonna keep that the way it is. So I just wanted to tell you guys that that is the change that we needed to make. So pretend like nothing broke. So if you look though, we want to have a few breakpoints just to test. So we have a login here. We want to kind of check, okay, it's going to go into the user account service.login. So we're going to put one on the login for the client, login for the controller, and then for the server as well here. Okay. I believe now we're ready to test this. So let's go in and try and see here. Okay, everything looks like it's building just fine here. All right, so we're gonna go into login. So we're seeing that here. Let's try and sign in with account, password, login. So we're hitting the login on the client, going to the controller, server. Okay, user exists. All right, result succeeded. Awesome. Generate a token. Failure. Unable to create keyed hash algorithm. Is greater than 256 bits. Has 192. So that issue. So all right, so it failed, right? So let's look at what it's going to output. Bad request. Okay, cool. So we can keep going here. So we're going to break here. We're going to look at what I believe is our issue, which is the length of our super awesome secret key that should be a bit longer. Okay. We'll see if that key was a little small to hash against it, so we'll actually get the correct length out of it. All right, so we're gonna log in here. Password. Okay, so we're back in the server. Okay, we're gonna try and do succeed. Okay, so token was created successfully. Awesome. All right, so it's gonna return that new status. We're gonna go back here to the controller. It's gonna return that. Okay. We are now in the client. We're going to return that response, save that token, successful login. Awesome. Okay, so we have a successful login. We're going to say, okay, now we're going to mark user as authenticated. Okay, we have an issue though. If we look, we have queue user work thread pool. No. We don't have. All right, let's look at the debugger actually. Let's look at our, let's break actually and go look at our output. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. Okay, so we have this custom auth state, right? But we actually don't have anything that has told it what it actually is, because right now it's not initialized to, well, it's not initialized to anything at this point. So if we go and look in login, we are going to here say we need to set the authentication somehow. So we're going to say when this page is rendered, so we're going to override the on after render async. So what happens is this is called after the page is rendered every single time, and a Boolean first render is passing. So anytime that this page has to render, this will be called. So we're going to say, we're going to try to, if it's the first render, we're going to try and cast the custom authentication state of this to the authentication state here. And we're going to try and catch that. And we're going to say if there's an exception, we'll just say, for now, we'll capture it and we'll just print it out to the screen. Okay. All right, so in this case, this should be hit here. Should is the keyword here. So we're trying to pass in the authentication state provider. We're going to cast it, and we're going to try and mark user as authenticated after we've hit the login. Let's go here. Okay, it's going to cast it, and unable to cast type of server. You see here, server authentication state provider. So it's currently trying to say, hey, this is the server and not the client, and we want it to actually not do that. So what's going to happen is it's going to catch that exception and re-render the page. And if you see here, so let's try and log in. what I think would be a better option, actually, now that I think about it, after we're going through that, let's take it out of the on after render. Let's take this here. And let's say that if you're going between the server and the client, right before you use it, let's cast it. Because if you're handling the valid login, it means that there's been some kind of user interactivity there. So let's try and set that custom authentication state here and use it. Okay. We're going to actually do what guy? That was the other mistake that I was deep in thought. All right, here we go. Let's try and log in here. Let's do an F5, login failure. Ooh. And we'll get a login failure with a 400 here. So let's look at the... I think I did the password wrong. Okay. On starting cannot be set because the response has already started. And the login model. Okay, so this is going to be an issue here with the login and the pre-rendering. And this is the issue I've been running into with Blazor and its kind of interoperability between server-side rendering and client-side rendering. Okay, so what? So let's try this. Let's go through here. Okay, we got that new status. Set the authentication state, and we have a problem here. And I think it might be because we also have an issue with the parameter JS runtime cannot be null. Get token async. So I believe we have an issue with the custom authentication state handling to mark the user as authenticated with this kind of thing. All right, give me one sec. Okay. So I forgot to hit record. So I'm going to go over some things that I just realized. So in our login, so let's talk about our login real quick. We're going to retype this out here. So the interoperability between the server rendering and then the client rendering, we need to have this. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, if it's the first render, we're going to try and cast it. If it fails, we're just going to print an error message. In reality, there's always going to be an error because this custom authentication state provider is going to try and cast when it's the server side. So it's not going to work. So this is going to fail. And then it's going to re-render when the client takes over, and it's going to be successful. So when we handle the valid login, this should then work. So because we're working with the interoperability of, the server rendering, the client rendering, we want to play around with both. This is a solution that I found that we're just going to stick with for the time being. However, that means for this page to work, we want to, in the nav menu, we're going to completely remove the nav link to /login. And what we're going to do instead is on the homepage, to be able to navigate the login, we're going to inject Navigation Manager. And what we're going to do when we have please log in, we're going to set a span on that here. So instead of it being an ahref, right, we're going to have a span that says, hey, cursor pointer, color dodger. So we're going to make it look just like the link. But on click,
we're going to say you're going to activate navigation manager.navigate to login, and this is the important bit, force load it as true. So we're going to force load that page and hopefully get to the client side rendering in that case. So we are going to set that as a rule here for the login page, is that if you're navigating to the login page, it's going to be a force load here. So now let's go take a look at one other thing. There was also another error that is in the custom authentication state provider. And that is a constructor that we didn't do. So before it was a private read-only JS runtime, and as we were going through, this didn't exist. So that JS runtime equaled nothing. So when we got to here, probably saw this, but the get token async is saying, okay, I'm calling JS runtime, but that doesn't equal anything. So it would fail out. It would fail. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna trace this through. Because I stopped recording, we're gonna trace this through all parts of the process, and I'm just gonna go over that just to make sure we have all our bases covered here. And then on the login page, we're gonna have it here. Okay, let's try login now. So we click, oh, I've been authorized, and that is because I tried logging in again off camera. So we need to have let's have a logout real quick. Well, that's nice to know that it is working now. So if we go to home, let's add under the authorized, we're gonna have a button, and we are going to call logout. And that logout is going to do we're going to inject here on the home page, all right, we'll actually save this for the next episode. So let's actually remove this, and we'll throw a logout button here, but in this case, I'll show you what it's kind of doing. So to test this, we need to have no token exist in our local storage. So if you go to inspect, and you go to application and check out local storage, you'll see we have an auth token here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to delete this, and we're going to refresh the page, and now we're logged out. So it's awesome to see that the authentication is handling that automatically. It's looking for that and saying, okay, this exists, so you are authenticated, you are authorized. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say, please log in here. We're going to click here. And now let's go through. We're forced load on that page. And we're going to log in with the password. So if we log in, we're taken to our breakpoint. So it's attempting that logon, and we're now going to the client user account service. Awesome. Now we're in the controller. Now we're in the server, and we are going to continue down here. User exists. Let's attempt the login. The login succeeded. So if it doesn't succeed, this is a successful login. I'm going to generate that token. That token worked. And what that does is, if you remember, it's actually writing that token. So it knows about that. So now when we go back to the login, we have a successful result in the controller. And we are going to return back to the client side of that service. And now we have a successful return here to the login page. And what we're going to do is we're going to mark the user as authenticated. So we got to get the token, know that it's going to claim certain things, and then notify the authentication state has changed by loading that user into the authentication state. Okay, so now it's going to try and navigate us back to the home page, and we should be able to see our "you have been authorized." Awesome. So again, if you want to log out, right, all the logout is currently doing is it's removing this auth token. So as soon as that auth token is there, the server is going to notice and send something to the client to say, hey, you've been authorized. But again, this all exists in the client side. So all the application stuff exists in the client side, right? So you could look at the elements here and look at what actually exists over in over here. So it might obfuscate some things, but again, like this is code that could be taken. And we're going to actually go over some more Blazor server components and things like that, so that we can possibly make the login a little bit less confusing and work a little bit better. But for now, we have a successfully logged in user that is showing a bit of the authorization and authentication of a Blazor web app. So good luck with this, and hopefully this can help you in other projects. And again, before I always forget, it changes. And authorization tags. Awesome.